Hello, and welcome to From Field to Foodscapes. I am Jennifer Morris, CEO of the Nature Conservancy. We are thrilled to co-host this program today with our colleagues from the Farmers Forum India. Thank you to Chair Ajay Jakar for your partnership in this important dialogue, and to the World Food Prize organization for supporting this event as part of your official agenda. We are seeing a groundswell of ambition around transforming global food systems. From the UN Food Systems Summit in New York City in September to the Biodiversity COP in Kunming, the message has been heard that in addressing the climate crisis, we must also address the intricate balance between food, nature, livelihoods, and people. Over the past century, we have built a food system designed primarily to feed the world, no matter the cost to our planet's natural capital. Now, given the urgent need to tackle the climate crisis and stem biodiversity loss, we need systems designed to not only feed the growing human population, but to restore the planet as well. I am optimistic there is a way to do both. At the Nature Conservancy, we believe that the orientation towards foodscapes is part of the answer and can provide approaches that work across economic, social, political, and environmental boundaries, bridging the gap between global aspiration and local solutions. Foodscapes are essential building blocks of global food systems. Going further, new science defines foodscape classes, bringing together biophysical qualities and management attributes of food-producing regions around the world. Using this approach, rooted in science, the Nature Conservancy and our partners have mapped the world's foodscapes to create a compelling foundation for integrated systems-level views. My colleague, Dr. Deborah Basio, will share an overview of this work in today's discussion and details of the Foodscape Science Report we recently published. To unlock the potential of this great work, we must work hand in hand with the farming community and organizations like the Food and Land Use Coalition, as well as corporate partners, national governments, and UN agencies like the FAO. Managing the food production transition collectively, while allowing for local methods, is our best hope to aid this global transformation and leverage foodscapes as a powerful catalyst for restoration and regeneration. I would like to sincerely thank the farmers and distinguished panel members joining us today. In this moment, I think we can all agree that we need to hear from farmers first. Transforming how we produce food will only happen with direct contributions from and collaboration with farmers. Farmers, ranchers, and fishers must be supported in the transition to a more nature-positive production system, and traditionally marginalized people must be intentionally included at every level. We must begin rewarding and incentivizing producers, especially those operating at smaller scales, in the right way to ultimately preserve and restore the surrounding ecosystem for a richer, healthier, and more productive environment. We look forward to working together to realize a future where our food systems work in partnership with nature, ensuring that both people and nature thrive. Please speak up and share your ideas, questions, comments, so that we can create a meaningful dialogue today. And thank you.
Greetings from California, where we're excited about the first rains of the season. Here, we're worrying not only about mega forest fires, but also the devastating consequences of drought and rising temperatures on our highly productive foodscapes. The San Joaquin Valley here in California produces 1/4 of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables eaten in the United States and relies heavily on surface and groundwater for irrigation. Farm workers especially are suffering from the heat. I imagine you all have similar stories playing out in your nearby foodscapes. At the Nature Conservancy, we're keenly aware of the stressors acting on and coming from the food system. We're inspired by global visions, setting out guidance for the needed transformations, and by local examples of the potential for food system changes to simultaneously address the interrelated challenges of climate, biodiversity, health, and equity. We want to help accelerate transition and increase ambition. Into this space, we offer this new work. We started by mapping the world's foodscapes. We see foodscapes as building blocks of the global food system, and we map them using the biophysical attributes and the management systems present in each place. In this way, it takes the world as it is now as a starting point. The global map, seen here, paints a rich, spatially explicit picture of over 80 distinct terrestrial foodscape classes. These classes include the cropland and grazing lands of our food production systems, along with other land uses such as forest, wetlands, and cities. This map emphasizes the diversity of our food production systems, calling for diversity in solution sets. The paradox of foodscapes is that they're both subject to pressures such as climate change and the source of those same pressures. Exploring the state of our foodscapes, we demonstrate that even our powerhouse foodscapes are not immune to the pressures of habitat loss, resource exploitation, climate change, and pollution. Overall, our analysis paints an alarming picture of the widespread pressures on foodscapes today. Here on this summary map, you see that many areas are experiencing not just one, but two or more pressures at the same time. Following the initial mapping, we combined classes into groups roughly representing intensity of both land use, how much area is covered in crops, and intensity of management. You see what pops up in dark green on this map are the bread baskets in North America, Europe, China, and India. We call these foodscapes the intensive production dominant group. Next, we have the mixed mosaic food cultivation group in light green. This group is common in hilly and mountainous areas of all continents. Here, smallholder agriculture, agroforestry, and grazing share space with natural ecosystems, and smaller areas of intensive crop production are common. Scattered food production and grazing in yellow covers a huge area across all continents, tending to be more semi-arid with extensive grazing and less cropland. Now, starting with these same intensity groups, intensive, mixed, and scattered, I want to walk you through another way to explore the attributes of the foodscapes. Here on the left of the diagram, we have the dominant soil type. Because soils are the result of the combined influence of the geology, topography, climate, and vegetation in any particular place, soil type represents a good shorthand for what underlies the foodscapes. It's notable that mollisols, deep, fertile, high organic matter soils, found mostly in the plains, dominate the intensive group, which covers the smallest terrestrial area, as you see on the left side of the diagram. The mixed mosaic group contains most of our tropical soils, such as the oxisols, but also a wide mix of soil types representing the wide range of biophysical conditions. The scattered production and grazing group covers the largest area, is dominated by younger and less fertile soils, such as inceptisols. We then take this view one step further, including the element of what comes from the foodscape, represented here as total crop output on the right-hand side. It's unfortunate that given data limitations, we couldn't include animal products at this time. It's dramatic to see that the intensive group, with a relatively small total area, produces 65% of the global crop output, including most of the cereals and oils, notably half of which are not fed directly to people, but ends up as animal feed, biofuels, or waste, and much also ends up in processed foods. These foodscapes are the bread baskets and include 82% of the world's irrigated lands. The mixed mosaic group produces a wide mix of crops and a lot of the perennials. Vegetables come from a limited number of mostly intensive foodscapes, including peri-urban areas. After mapping the world's existing foodscapes and examining the pressures they're facing, we explored the opportunities to address challenges in and from foodscapes with nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions include agroecology and regenerative agriculture, protection and restoration of nature, and interventions leading to healthy and productive oceans. Note that our scenarios present maximum technical potentials and are intended to guide further exploration regionally and locally. The scenarios we explored for habitat and climate benefit include restoration, agroforestry, and soil health management. With these interventions, we identified more than 1 billion hectares of land suitable for restoration or biodiversity-friendly agriculture, and up to 14 gigatons of CO2 per year in carbon storage. The largest contributor to these potential outcomes is agroforestry in croplands and grazing lands. We focused here on carbon removal and storage. Of course, emissions reductions in agriculture is also an imperative. Here you see the distribution of the opportunity for silvopasture agroforestry, which is growing trees and improving management and grazing systems. The majority of this opportunity is found in the mixed mosaic group of foodscapes. We also present the potential for restorative aquaculture, which can simultaneously support food production and restore degraded aquatic environments. Regionally, Australia and New Zealand stand out with the most opportunity, followed by South America and North America. Overall, the potential exists to increase edible food from the sea from between 36 to 74% by 2050 through improved management of wild fisheries and restorative aquaculture. Food from the sea is particularly important from a global food system perspective, given the potential to reduce pressure on land. Okay, the last scenario I'll show you is a really hot topic, nitrogen pollution. It's a threat to people and to nature, and nitrogen surpluses are widespread in intensive agriculture. We developed a scenario by which nitrogen use in agriculture could be cut in half with nature-based solutions. Working within local areas, we calculated first the potential to reduce surplus nitrogen as the lowest hanging fruit, and then the potential for leguminous cover crops to supply nitrogen, then excess animal manure, and finally human waste. This scenario leaves behind a lot of technical potential, especially in recycling urban waste, but we recognize significant barriers to more extensive recycling. With each of our scenarios, from restoration to fertilizer reduction to water management, we've started with the world as it is and do not propose major changes in other aspects of the food system, such as trade, diets, and food waste, that could facilitate even larger shifts in land use. But still, this is not a modest agenda and will require significant investment and action across all sectors. And we're clear-eyed on the limitations of this type of global analysis. They simplify the world and can't address really important things such as socioeconomic issues, social equity, poverty, livelihoods, communities and cultures. To explore local transitions toward nature-based solutions, we also offer a set of local foodscapes. Here we present in detail the actors, the interventions, processes, and economics of transition in particular places. One of the high-level messages from these is that the cost of transition are outweighed by the benefits when both public and private benefits are considered. If you'd like to read more stories, please visit the Foodscapes in Focus section of the report. Going forward, there is so much to do, more science, and especially action to create a nature-based transition on the ground in foodscapes. This event embodies one of the most important pieces of that, listening to food producers. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with you today, and I look forward to the adventure ahead.
Catherine Hayhoe. I'm the Chief Scientist for the Nature Conservancy. I'm from Canada, and I live in West Texas, which is a deeply agricultural area where the economy is primarily based on cotton and cattle. I'm also a climate scientist, so I know that climate change is shifting rainfall patterns, changing temperatures, and altering the risk of many types of extreme events that affect crop yields and livestock productivity. I've looked at how climate change impacts everything from cattle production and dairy to specialty crops like wine, grapes, and fruit. But I also know that it's not just about impacts. Farming practices can be both resilient to the impacts of a changing climate and a huge part of the climate solution by putting carbon back in the soil through practices ranging from cover crops and agroforestry to managed grazing. That's why I'm so delighted to be part of this panel with farmers from around the world, from Kenya, Argentina, Mexico, and the United States, talking about not only how they feed the world, but how they are a central part of restoring the planet. So I'm going to ask each participant to introduce themselves as they answer our first question, which is this. Tell us why you decided to adopt these conservation and regenerative agricultural practices. What motivated you to do so? What changes have you made and what benefits have you seen as a result? David, over to you.
Hello, my name is David from Kenya in Africa. I'm the chairman of Laikipia County Natural Resources Network. Laikipia County Natural Resources Network, or LICON as we call it. It's a landscape forum that involves farmers, tourism, and water sector, and business people in management of the natural resources of our landscape, which lies primarily between the Aberdares Mountain and Mount Kenya, right on the equator. It's actually more or less in the middle of the country of Kenya. And one of the reasons that made me start getting seriously interested in regenerative and conservation activities was my first experience almost 30 years ago. I rented a small fish farm and I wanted to grow trout next to Mount Kenya Safari Club, which was a snow-clad mountain by then. And then I didn't know that whoever was leasing me the land had already started experiencing climate changes. So halfway into my first crop of trout, the rivers died right on the periphery of the mountain, on the forest edge. Just one night, my security watchman called me and told me there's no water in the river. I could not believe it. Later on, I realized that whoever had leased me the land had gone into water recycling using tanks and pumping system to sustain in fish, where he went next. I moved on and I bought a small farm and I decided to do a different kind of fish, the catfish, in a primarily dry land, now knowing that this is not going to be a big problem. So I did some water ponds in a place called Rumuruti and put my first stock of the fish. And one night, my wife calls me and tells me, do you know what? There's a party in the farm. Elephants and zebras were right in my fish ponds trying to get water for water. And, you know, I couldn't get mad because I knew I was in their territory and there was no water in the river and the dams had dried. That started me thinking about how do we start changing. Unfortunately, over the last 30 years, a lot of changes have gone with climate change and the global warming. Most of the patches of tree cover has been cut down for charcoal farming, charcoal burning and all that. Overgrazing has taken its real effect. Seasons have changed so much that even our pastoralists, where I come from, we do pastoralism. So we have people keep cattle and we have farmers who do wheat and maize mainly. But the problem is also that most of that land is smallholder pockets, 10, 5 acres and all that kind of thing. So that subdivision has created a lot of tension in our country. If someone was looking in Kenya in the last few weeks, there was violence, ranches being encroached upon, people being shot at as pastoralists try to gain entrance into a farm where there's grass or available fodder. So this has actually brought me to start realizing and what can we do as a network? Because most of the conflicts are brought by farmers as they try to create more land to grow more food, and overuse of the farm, the long approaches to use them. So whether the question was, how do we start changing this? So the discussion we've been is trying to pilot it, because even when you talk about it, nobody believes you. So when they see your farm growing, there's weed in your farm and you're not burning it or spraying it, they're just like, why are you keeping the weed? For me, partly it's gonna be fodder for my crops. For my animals. At the same time, it is part of the crop cover. So this is what has actually changed my approach. I do no longer have to go and plant a tree because I know if I enclose an area, some tree is going to come out there, and that's a natural tree and it's going to grow faster than current trees that you have to bring different species. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons we've been doing this, and we've been trying to talk to people, trying to talk to farmer groups who are our members. And then the biggest problem, everybody has moved into the forest, trying to create more space using a pellis program that the Kenya Forest Services has been trying to do in the country, where people go and cultivate, grow food, and plant trees. So everybody has moved there, and you know what has happened is when the crop grows in the first season, the soil is very rich. The next season, they take fertilizers into the forest. That has made a very serious problem in the forest. Water abstraction for irrigation has also become a very major problem. So the people downstream do not get water. And this is one of the conflicts that we have consistently enjoyed between wildlife and the pastoralism. So we really need to find a way how we transform this. So we are telling the pastoralists that you need to start planning how you keep your livestock, and how you also do recovery of your forest or tree cover for your fodder, while at the same time trying to see how you use the energy that comes from the cows rather than cutting down the trees. So these some of the approaches and the discussions we are having in Laikipia, in Kenya, because this is an African problem. And I'm happy to see we have friends from India who have a bigger population than us. We can borrow from them. We have friends in India who are doing flood water storage underground. And we like to experience this because we believe that there's no rain that has gone out of the stratosphere. It's still circulating there, but the patterns on when it comes is the problem. So we need to be able to harvest the water when you have it. And there's a big dialogue with that. Now, the policies are skewed. Now, how do you translate these policies? Because our policymakers are people, most of them who have grown from the farm. They never made, their parents never made a living in the farm. So when they go to government policy, they don't want to go back to the farm. They don't want their parents because their parents they've grown up the hard way. So they forget that and they do different kind of policies. So these are discussions that we've been having, very serious discussion, because the farmer stays down there and that's the end of it. But we need to bring the farmer to a different level, a different scale, where he's not a worker, but he's a businessman with an approach that gives him a holiday at one time in his lifetime.
I love that. The farmer needs to be the business person helping to make policies. So, Kristen, you come from a completely different part of the world. You are a farmer in Minnesota on a very different landscape, but introduce yourself to us. Tell us about your operation. What motivated you to adopt these practices and what benefits have you seen?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here with these distinguished people today. Yes, we are from South Central Minnesota, so south of Minneapolis, north of Des Moines. And the soil here is very different than other places in the world, which is one of the magical and wonderful things that we get to do every day. My husband and I are partners at Highland Family Farms. We raise corn, soybeans, small grains, and hogs. And so we have what we call a full circle farm in that we utilize the manure from the hog operation on the landscape. We're very careful on how we test and make sure we know exactly what nutrients are. We study intensely the different practices that allow us to use those nutrients there too. So our decision has been over a career of about 30 or 35 years where we've been lucky to see practices around the globe as well as in the United States from a network of farmers that we work with and say, okay, so our goal is to be more productive. How do we be more productive and still have respect and maintain the environment and the culture in which we live? All those things are important to us, the economics, the environment, and the community. So when I look at an opportunity like Foodscapes that TNC is talking about, it's really exciting to see that we can work in those landscapes. The benefits we've seen, so we have lots of things happening out here, different varieties and different places of tillage. We're looking constantly at tillage practices and what practice best fits the operation on that piece of ground that we're going to grow something on. So right now you'd see anything from no-till, minimum till, strict till out here. Our program is fluid. We don't think that we're just going to stop once we start one practice. We want to eliminate risk, and risk to us is from environmental things and weather, whether it's erosion or the wind. Building that soil tilth through all these practices is a huge benefit to us. So we've seen a lot of great increase in bushels or yield, which is one of our measurements here. We've seen a great increase in soil tilth, organic matter, all those kind of things. When we first started talking about using cover crops, my husband was the denier. He wanted to do it to prove that it didn't work. Guess what? It did. So we now are trying different things species-wise, whether it's hybrid rye, where we're able to take the rye off and sell the rye as a product, but still get the benefit of the product, or it's a multi-species cover crop. All those things are part of what we do out here as we look for proof of concepts and constant improvement. Those are the things that are very important to us. The tricky part is that getting sound data to prove takes time because we're big into rotational. So in 10 years, we've only got 5 years of data on a particular crop, or 3 years. So that's one of the things that has taken some time to realize is how we show the value in good numbers.
I love that. Kristen for the win there. So Maria, you operate again in a completely different part of the world. You and your family are farmers in Argentina. Tell us what made you adopt these types of practices and what benefits you've seen.
Oh, well, hi, thanks, Catherine, and thanks to the Natural Conservancy for the opportunity to listen to farmers. I am Maria Giraudo. Perhaps you know me as Pilu Giraudo. I am an agronomist engineer, farmer and advisor, and I have been involved in sustainable agriculture and regenerative practices for the last 30 years, more or less. This began with the revolution in my country and in the South American region, when farmers were very concerned about the advance of soil erosion caused by water and wind, and found in no-till farming, that is eliminating tillage, and they found with this tool the beginning of a system with practices inspired by nature. And my father was one of these farmers in this group, and so that's why I was involved. I had been involved from the very beginning, and they were very generous with all of us. At that time we were young, and the result was to stop a paradigm of deterioration and to start a paradigm of a paradigm of regeneration, a paradigm of care, with nature positive, with a holistic outlook and continuous improvement. And today, after more than 30 years, we can share some achievements like that soil erosion was stopped by 90%. We are more efficient in using the water. For example, we reduce more than 70% the direct evaporation of water from soils. We are better with the capture of water from rains, and also we have better storage. We improve all the soil conditions, physical, chemical, and biological. Of course, our carbon sequestration is a great benefit. And a very, very good point is that we reduce the use of fossil fuel and more than 60%. Can you imagine? That is a direct relation reducing gases emissions. And this is, I'm going to repeat, it is a holistic outlook. It is a holistic point of view. We don't have recipes. We work with nature. That's why we are researching, improving. Innovation is crucial for us, and science is crucial for us in order to improve all the time in this way. This is more or less the summary for the beginning of this conversation.
I love that. Thank you so much, Maria. And last but not least, Alejandro, you come to us from Mexico. What motivated you to begin these conservation practices, and what benefits have you seen?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, for the invitation, and it's an honor to share this panel with my colleagues. I'm actually from Chihuahua, Mexico, I'm a rancher there in the Chihuahuan Desert. We get an average of 10 inches of precipitation per year. On the last years, we only got like 7 or 8 inches. So I do remember when I joined the ranch back in 2004, I had some experience during my summer spending time at the ranches on that area, and I really did not like the way things work. Always in this drought mode, dry spell, making money 4 out of 5 years. So I thought that it would be a better way to change things. And I was very fortunate to have some people practicing holistic management in Chihuahua, Mexico. So I got educated, and we started, as Maria says, we're dealing with nature. All we're doing is we're just not really creating anything new. What we're doing is actually mimicking nature. We're mimicking nature, and we're imitating these great bison migrations on these grasslands in North America. And that was my major motivation, saying, okay, how can we make things much better and enjoyable here? We have seen really great benefits here at the ranch. Talking, for example, when we start doing this regen ranching, we counted probably just like 5 species of perennial grasses. Now we have more than 50 species of perennial grasses. Or infiltration rates, when it rains, it goes from, on various paths, you can only infiltrate like 2 inches per hour. Now we're able to infiltrate even up to 18 inches per hour on some places. We have measured the temperature as well. For example, if the outside temperature could be like a month ago, could be on the 90s on bare ground in the afternoon, it could reach actually 150 Fahrenheit degrees. But in our grasses, it's only like 75 Fahrenheit degrees. It's pretty amazing. I mean, if you extrapolate that to the millions of hectares of acres around the world, that's a big issue we have with the climate change. So we have seen really very drastic changes. Obviously, there are social benefits and family benefits. We're talking about exciting things instead of just complaining about, it doesn't rain and so on.
I love that. So this has been so fascinating hearing all of your different stories. And I want to ask all of you a very short question. So if you could tell me in 1 minute, this is the fun question, what has been the reaction of your peer farmers in your region? Kristen, what have you heard from your neighbors?
Well, our neighbors think we're crazy. And I think that part of that is because, I spend time as a trustee at the Nature Conservancy. I write for the Environmental Defense Fund. I look for opportunities, as does my husband, to partner with groups that are not traditional. So our neighbors drive by here and they see that we've got all these different things happening. So the one group says, okay, what are you doing? And what are the benefits? But keep in mind, there's this other group that we are neighbors, but we're also competitors because we may get a different contract or our yield is higher or theirs is. So it's an interesting cultural thing. And people are polite, but adaptation until they see the value is tough. So, it's no secret. They all think we're kind of nuts.
Well, I think that's a common theme because Alejandro, what were you saying to me about what your neighbors say to you?
Well, Catherine, we have 2 kinds of neighbors. The ones that think that we're crazy and the ones that not we're crazy. I mean, reality is that some of my neighbors have not really made any change, but some others have made changes. And I do believe that even though we may think that, okay, it's great for my neighbor not to do great things because I'm getting his soil and so on, for erosion. But I think at the end of the day, we all need to work as a community and we have to help our neighbors because we have to see this as greater than just our ranch or farm.
I love that so much. That's so perfect. Maria, what do you experience with your neighbors?
Well, can you imagine this change, this revolution 30 years ago? Everyone was thinking that all these farmers were crazy. They were waiting for their failure, you know, and it was incredible because this began by farmers, and now this is perhaps the best part of the story, because they are the real actors of this problem. And so today in my country, the adoption of no-till farming is more than 90%.
That is absolutely incredible. All right, David, you get the last answer. What do your neighbors say? You're muted there. Oops. Still muted. No, so yeah. there. Yeah. Okay. What do your neighbors say when they see what you're doing?
One, they thought I was crazy, that I couldn't put a tractor with an ordinary djembe or what you call the tiller. Mm-hmm. And I brought a reaper, and I cut trenches on my farm, and they couldn't believe it. Then I planted, and there was very minimal rain, and my crop grew. Theirs did not. I did a lot of mulching then, I remember. And they were just like, how could you do this? Then I started composting. The biggest problem was the yield was different. By the time my farm started recovering, without using any fertilizer organically, they just told me, no, you're doing the wrong thing, because they can harvest more. But today I don't need the fertilizer. So my production cost has gone down in a big way, and my crops are healthy, and we have less insects and other pests that are coming to my farm. But all the same is the regeneration process of the soil is very important, because that's the route to recovery. And my neighbors are seeing a difference. When there is no rain, I still have some crop in my land. I don't buy vegetables. My cow has it sufficient. Hey, sorry for your name. I was just cutting my hair yesterday. And my cows are still having hay, and nobody has hay in the entire neighborhood. So they're already adopting and saying, this is the way to go. And this is a big story, but it takes a long time for people to start converting it, because the education concept has always been more fertilizers, more pesticide, all that. But now trying to change the tune is a problem. But the big question is, when you go to a forest, you don't take fertilizer for your first 3 or 4 crops. So what happened then? That's my biggest selling point. You found nature doing its own work. So can we do the same thing in our farms? And then you don't have to talk about costs and production issues. So the question is, how did you know it? Curiosity and just understanding my limitations. I realized that the climate change, so there won't be water, so I need to harvest water. Mm-hmm. I realized there's climate change. These are excessive temperatures. I have to mulch my plants. Mm-hmm. So people are taking it up, but gradually it's happening. The World Bank supported that with the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Productivity, which created a lot of awareness on the whole concept of climate smart agriculture. Mm-hmm. So it's changing, but it's going to take time, because the policy are not in the same direction, but we are doing it.
I love that. So the last question that I had was, what keeps you up at night? And I want to answer that question first, and then I want to ask each of you for just one sentence as we finish this panel. One sentence. What keeps you up at night? So I am a climate scientist, and I look at what's happening to this world. And often what keeps me up at night is just seeing how things are changing faster and to a greater extent than we thought. What helps me sleep at night? Hearing your stories. That's what helps me sleep at night, knowing that there are so many people who are implementing so many solutions around the world that help people today and help with climate change tomorrow. So thank you for sharing your story. You've helped me sleep at night. But as we move to the next panel, and please everyone stay tuned, because there's another amazing panel coming up. Let me just ask you in one sentence, what keeps you up at night? Starting with Maria.
We have part of the solution, and we need to work all the scales all together, and we need to be together. Farmers, policymakers, and researchers, always listening to civil society, of course, but we must work together.
I love that. Working together is so important. Alejandro, what would you say?
We want to bring hope where there's no hope, because we know we have done it and it can be done.
Yes, working together with hope. That's so good. Well, with that, I think I'm going to end the panel, because how can we say anything better? We need to work together with hope, because action is what brings us hope. All of you are acting. All of you give us hope. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And everyone, please stay tuned for the next panel.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ajay Jakar, working with the Farmers Organization in India. Great to be here in this partnership with TNC on this day of the official launch of the TNC's flagship science report, Foodscapes, Planning the Food Systems Transformation. The passion of the farmers we've just seen is infectious, and the commitment to collaborate on the concept of One Health, where health of the people and the planet are interconnected. I also want to thank the farmers for making all here witness that having farmers at the table is the way forward to ensuring we get where we want to reach. Farmers clearly articulated they're willing to learn, but they're also telling us, trust us as being stewards of knowledgeable practices and to be consulted on a foodscapes intervention that are most suitable to their operations. They are rational, responding to market-driven incentives and government programs. I think so that should be a message for this panel. And I also want to add from my experience that often farmers are blamed, but the practices they are blamed for were taught by researchers. But that knowledge was given, and we need to work together to transform that. Nothing about us without us. With that, we get to our next enlightened panel, taking a deeper look at these insights to consider ways we can take solutions, scale solutions that matter for farmers, the food systems, and the planet. Welcome to all the panelists. Let me begin with the Chief Economist at FAO, Maximo Terrero. Sir, how do we ensure that we manage trade-offs and avoid unintended consequences related to a transition to regenerative food systems? What is needed from the stakeholders to support scaling such solutions?
Thank you very much, Jay, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think understanding the existence of trade-offs is the first issue that I think is extremely important. And working with farmers is central on this. Why? Because as you correctly said at the beginning, normally we try to implement solutions, and in this case, regenerative solutions. We're trying to recover the ecosystem and the nature over which we are trying to do crop intensification, for example, to produce more to reduce hunger. But we not necessarily are responding to the real needs of the problem and the challenge we're facing in the field. And we sometimes make farmers make decisions which not necessarily correct. And farmers normally will, especially smallholders, have a huge budget constraint. So any wrongdoing in terms of what we tell them to do could create a consequence. So my first thing will be to understand that to achieve a goal, you will create trade-offs, and trade-offs could be on soil, water, energy, land. It could be on biodiversity, more emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and even land and income inequality. Understanding those and measuring those will allow us to choose what is the correct pathway over which we need to move. So what is the correct set of decisions that we need to move to be able to make it achieved objective with the lower trade-offs behind those. So that would be, for me, the first recommendation. The second recommendation is to understand the science and the science behind of what is needed to minimize those trade-offs once we know what they are. And that science requires to understand, for example, soil characteristics, requires to understand what are the consequences. And there was a very nice presentation about nitrogen and soil maps and the importance of soil maps in those ecosystems. It's really important to understand what are the micronutrients missing in the soils so that the solutions are trying to resolve the problem rather than to creating standardized packages and scaling up standardized practices that not necessarily will respond to the reality of the area that we are working with. That's central, to be able to have that match between the real problem and the solutions to those problems. And finally, and I stop there, Ajay, is cost effectiveness. I think for farmers, bringing solutions to them needs to be cost effective and needs to be a business case behind what we're trying to do. And if there is no business case and there is a sustainability aim behind it, then we need to find the mechanism and the incentives for them to assume that is additional cost. But that's sometimes things that we don't take into consideration, and we make farmers make decisions that will lower their yields, for example, will lower the revenue, and therefore they are not sustainable. So we need to carefully assess those so that we can bring the solutions as needed. Thank you very much.
That was insightful. Let's move on. Ellis Golan, you are the Director of Sustainable Development at USDA. USDA is key to a successful transformation, and the question to you specifically is, the actions of governments can be the most powerful driver of food systems transition, as they can change the economics that drives actors in global food systems. How can public policies and regulatory frameworks provide incentives to support the transition of more producers at scale that matter?
Thank you, Ajay, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's lovely to see some familiar faces, and I'm certainly going to agree with everything that Maximo just said. It is true that governments can play a very important and positive role in helping to incentivize the adoption of climate-smart agriculture and forestry practices. The trick to making sure that such efforts do not backfire, however, is to aim for programs and policies that incentivize the desired outcomes, such as soil health, improved water and air quality, and biodiversity. Programs that don't target outcomes, but instead incentivize particular practices, can be very limited in scope, since not all practices are applicable to all crops or environmental settings. They can also quickly become obsolete, meaning that incentive programs could end up paying for inferior practices that have been replaced with even incentives with an eye to unintended consequences, as we've been talking about. We need to design policies and programs that consider, evaluate, and address the direct and indirect impacts of policy. Those are including social, economic, and environmental impacts across a range of environmental indicators. One reason that I like the holistic landscape approach to sustainability, such as what TNC is proposing, or is launching actually, is that such approaches, all approaches that are place-based and rooted in the social, economic, and environmental landscapes in which they operate, these provide the best chances for lasting success. And those that tap into the creativity, ingenuity, and knowledge of the farmers and ranchers that are actually working the land have the best chances of all. I'm going to just mention very briefly 3 programs that USDA is running that include a place-based approach. The first is the USDA Climate Hubs. These are designed to address the multiple goals of climate-smart agriculture in a place-specific, albeit a large place-specific setting. The Climate Hubs are located in 10 regional centers across the United States. And they emerged because of the recognition that though USDA has made substantial investments in research, data, and tools for climate-smart ag, these resources are often in the format that was not easily transferred or understood by land managers or USDA staff who were actually providing the information. In addition, because climate change affects food, forest, and fiber production across the United States in very different ways that vary by region, the tools developed for one region might not be optimal for another region. by building regional partnerships and through the climate hubs and serving as a convening co-production body. We're working together with the farmers and the ranchers on the land. The USDA Climate Hubs support the development, interpretation, and provision of compelling, accessible, and regionally appropriate information, support, and tools for those who are actually working the lands in the communities where they live, recognizing all the constraints that they have working on them. Another example of a place-based approach that USDA has adopted was announced in April of this year, or actually is reinforced in April of this year, when Secretary Vilsack announced that USDA is investing $330 million in 85 locally driven public-private partnerships under the Regional Conservation Partnership Program to address climate change and other natural resource challenges. At the same time he made that announcement, the Secretary announced a goal to enroll up to 4 million new acres in the Conservation Reserve Program by raising the rental payment rates, good incentives, and expanding the number of incentivized environmental practices allowed by the program. The Conservation Reserve Program is a very, very powerful tool when it comes to climate mitigation. And the acres currently enrolled in the program here in the United States mitigate more than 12 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And if USDA reaches its goal of enrolling additional 4 million acres into the program, it will mitigate an additional 4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent and prevent 90 million pounds of nitrogen and 33 million tons of sediment from running into our waterways each year. Now, bedrock to all of these USDA programs is good science on the environmental impacts of production practices across regions and landscapes. USDA technical assistance is critical to enable producers to plan and implement conservation practices that are appropriate to their needs. In April, the Secretary announced a new investment in increasing technical assistance capacity for conservation reserve programs of $140 million and investing another $10 million in monitoring, assessment, and evaluation. Without that kind of monitoring and assessment, that good bedrock science, all of our efforts would essentially be flying blind. These are the kind of tools we need to supply to really make sure that farmers who are taking a bet on these types of new approaches are not betting the farm and their households and their livelihoods. Thank you.
Great. I like that. Not letting farmers bet their households and their livelihoods. Thank you for that. We'll move on to Earthrine Cousin. Before you were president and CEO of Food Systems for the Future, you were leading the World Food Program. How can financial institutions across the public, private, and multilateral sectors raise the ambition and drive action towards supporting a transition to nature-positive, equitable food systems that provide healthy nutrition, food for all?
Well, AJ, thank you very much for that question. And let me just, first of all, support everything that's been said by the panelists before me. I feel like I'm out of place here with the level of science and expertise that has been demonstrated, not just by the panelists in their comments today, but in the work of each of them that I'm quite familiar with. And the reason I start there is because when we talk about addressing the issues of ensuring the access to opportunity for farmers across the globe, regardless of geography, regardless of income, as it was just stated by Elise, it must be based in science. And the challenge that we have is too often the programs and the new tools that come online are coming online for affluent farmers, for farmers who have access to the financial capacity to support their ability to invest in new precision agriculture tools, new biological tools that make their farming in context more sustainable and durable, both from an environmental standpoint as well as from an economic standpoint. This is what must change. We must ensure that regardless of geography, regardless of income, that all farmers have access to the tools that are necessary, not just for new programs, but to scale those activities we know that work, that provide an opportunities for farmers to change and support agricultural practice that are environmentally sustainable and economically sustainable. We don't do it as a global community. We come in with programs. When program dollars run out, we do not have that business case that Maximo was talking about that should support the investments that we are making that will ensure that it is beyond a program. It is sustainable and durable because it is the business of the farmers, and they have received the access to the tools and the finance that is necessary for them to adopt those business practices and to use those tools in a way that will make a difference for their economic health and for the health of the environment and their communities. That's the missing link in all of this, is that we are not identifying what are the subsidies on the public side to ensure that there's access to those tools, as well as the private sector investment that is necessary to support the expansion of those tools into all of the farmer groups that we've just described.
Thank you, Autrin. As good as ever. I will take that forward to Ben Farger, Managing Director for Sustainability, Cargill Ag Supply Chain in North America. Ben, you would know the best. You're the best to articulate on the private sector. The private sector can bring the scaling mechanisms towards a nature positive solution. How can companies raise the ambition and actions towards supporting the transition to regenerative food systems? Ben, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, AJ. Hello, everybody. Appreciate the my fellow panel members and the audience engagement today. Look, it's a fantastic question, AJ, and certainly from our point of view at Cargill, we are committed to expanding and working with farmers on regenerative agriculture and sustainability initiatives. And for us, if we are to achieve as a globe these sustainability challenges and overcome these sustainability challenges, contribute to them, and also produce food, as has been mentioned by the other panel members, then one thing is clear. We have to work with the people that are managing our land and water resources. And in so many cases, that is our farmers. And so we are seeking to stand alongside our farmer customers and really support them in the good work they do as they inherently think about a long-term sustainable agricultural landscape, as they inherently thinking about passing their greatest asset, the soil and land, water resources, onto future generations. And as you say in your question, how do we do more of that, and how do we scale that going forward? And for us, there's a couple of things in the programs that we run, many programs that we run around the world, that we've learnt about how to facilitate more scale and engagement with our farmers. And a couple of those things, AJ, would be, firstly, we really do want to talk to our farmers about the practical economics on their farm. Be transparent about that in terms of new practices when we're looking at tillage arrangements or cover crop arrangements or new fertiliser practices and nutrient management. What are the potential costs of those measures? What are the potential revenue impacts of those measures in a very practical, economic and science-based way? Because that's what resonates with our growers. So that's a very important factor that we find in communicating with our growers. The second thing that we've learned is that we have to stand by our farmers and really meet them where they are. As another panel member just mentioned, we've got a situation where we've obviously got different soil types, different arrangements across our landscapes, different commodity mixes, different rotations, and indeed different aspirations and farming methods within the farming community. So we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach. We are not seeking to put our growers in a box and say this is a Cargill program. It's about a multitude of different programs and support mechanisms to work alongside our grower customers and be transparent about what we can do in a particular area, a particular production system. That flexibility is very important. Thirdly, the ease of access into these programs is very important. I talked about the practicality of the economics, but the ease of access into the program, the way we use digital tools, the data that our growers have, the data that publicly is available, publicly information, and also with new climate models, including soil and carbon models that are being developed. It's very important. It can be complex. And so to make it as simple as possible, as practical as possible, and for growers to be able to access these programs, not with a huge amount of administrative burden, but onus of responsibility on a company like Cargill and others to make it easy to engage in these types of programs. That's very important. And the last thing, and probably the most important, AJ, is the trust and transparency in the system. Our growers want to know from companies like Cargill and others, our farmers want to know how the systems work, how the programs work, the length of the contracts, pricing arrangements, how the supply chain works through to our food and CPG customers. And we want to be transparent about that and about the things we know. And indeed, when you start talking about nature-based solutions and new environmental markets that are being talked about, we need to talk about the things we don't know too. Because of course, as these markets develop, given they're nascent, there are a lot of things that need to be worked out in terms of protocols and standards and global frameworks. And so that transparency and trust is something that obviously consumers are looking for, rightly. Obviously, companies and NGO organisations and the broader community are looking for, rightly. But our farmers are looking for that too. And that's where there's a real opportunity, including for companies and private sector players like Cargill, to be able to link that information together and provide that type of discussion and discourse. Thanks,
Ben.
AJ.
Thank you, Ben. The message I take is it's really nice that you talk about and bring up the topic of trust and transparency. We need to really bridge that gap, and farmers clearly realize that no transition is possible without the commitment of the private sector. So we'll move on to the next set of questions, and I'll request the panelists to keep the answers precise, so we may have time to take some questions from the audience. So back to the second part. Maximo, I'll just ask you the first question. What is the role of technology and innovation that can play to transition to regenerative food systems?
Oh, I think there is no doubt that we need science, technology, and innovation to transform the agri-food systems, and of course, regenerative agri-food systems transformation. And technological innovation and adoption are essential to generate win-win solutions along the triple bottom line of sustainability, economic, environmental, and social. And technological innovations can be applied to support regenerative food system development across the chains from production to consumption, bringing high-yielding varieties and production methods that protect the soil and sequester carbon, water, efficient food processing methods, recyclable packaging materials, novel solutions to reduce emissions in the food supply chain, and methods to collect excess of food and reduce food waste and losses across the production. And for that, we can use digital technologies like the Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and there is a lot of work being done in that topic. And can also be applied to increase the efficiency of sustainability operations. But technologies can in themselves help ensure the triple burden of sustainability? I don't think so. I think that we need something else. And there are two other things that we look very carefully in FAO. One is data and real-time data, and that is very linked to what it was mentioned before, because the only way we're going to be transparent in this process is if we provide real-time data and data to the farmers as well as to the consumers, to assure that things are moving in the correct direction. And the problem we observe is that that's not necessarily the case. We don't have the information available, and in many cases, we have a market structure in the agricultural sector which is highly concentrated, meaning very big few companies control significant amount of this technology and innovation. And as a result of that, they also control the data. And here is where I want to underscore the importance of the third element. So it's not only technology, innovation, and data, but there is a third element that normally we don't take into consideration, which is institutions and the innovation institutions that we need to have in place to assure that whatever technology and innovation brings is also inclusive. And we call them complements, which are basically governance institutions and human capital. Why? Because human capital can also be a barrier of entry, can also be a mechanism of exclusion that won't allow farmers to benefit from these technologies in an inclusive way. Now, how to set up these institutional arrangements or regulatory arrangements that are needed to minimize the potential concentration or bigger concentration of technology and of information is central, and we need to leapfrog. We need to learn from countries that have already done this, and we need to find ways in which we can do it so that we avoid capture. And that's something that could be at the regional level, could allow us to have some institutional innovations that will help countries which are not so strong right now in terms of institutionality to have a mechanism where they can allow the use of science, technology, and innovation and data in an inclusive way. So the three elements for us are central: innovation and technology based on science, data, real-time data, but institutions or complements that will assure that these are inclusive. It could be that I will slow the pace at which we can move in acceleration of technology, innovation, and data, but it also assures that in the future it's sustainable. And that's extremely important, especially for farmers, because sometimes, especially when they are smallholders, they are atomized, and it's very difficult for them to have the economies of scale to benefit from these technologies. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much. Maxim, I just want to add as a farmer that I feel science needs to develop further to recognize the value of traditional knowledge in going forward. You know, it's knowledge that's been accumulated over a millennium. Science needs to somehow recognize the value of how it is valuable. But I love your third element about institutional innovation. I mean, that's one of the key things that policymakers don't talk about. Thank you for that. So we move on to the next question. And Ellis, the Paris Climate Summit pledged to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 in new and additional funds to help developing countries avoid the climate crisis, the worst effects of the climate change crisis. Should this and can this be purposed for a food systems transition in the global south to fight the climate emergency?
So thanks, Ajay. So this is a very difficult question, and I have to admit I'm not going to answer your question directly. This is not my area of expertise, and I think it's quite a difficult question to answer. But I would say, what I would like to say is that there has been a very good reframing of the way we're thinking about these global issues. This food systems approach that was so successfully launched at the UN Food Systems Summit has been percolating for quite a long time. But I think it really is truly anchored now in the way that we're thinking about these issues, these problems related to agriculture, food, health, the environment, climate change. You know, we're coming at it with a more integral, holistic approach. And I think that is going to be reflected across the board. I know it's starting to be reflected in US policy, and it certainly, I think, is being reflected in what the UN is doing and setting out in its planning. I do know that the U.S. global food security strategy refresh that will be announced maybe even today, but soon, also embraces the food systems approach. And so they're officially seeing this starting to appear in U.S. government framing of policy. I think this is what Maximo would call maybe an institutional change. In addition, as we're reaching out across different departments of the U.S. government to embrace this type of thinking. I would also like to say it is, I'm going to talk fast, I know we're running out of time, also embedded in a coalition that the U.S. announced at the UN Food Systems Summit. And this coalition, which is called the Sustainable Productivity Growth Coalition for Food Security and Resource Conservation, or SPG Coalition for short, has the goal of accelerating sustainable agricultural productivity growth. And the coalition is built on two observations. First is that more efficient agriculture and food systems that produce more with less are critical for meeting the world's food needs, alleviating poverty, particularly in the developing world, in shrinking agriculture's environmental impact, and in combating climate change. It's going to be difficult to achieve these goals without productivity growth. But the second observation is that ag productivity growth, while it's necessary, it's not a sufficient solution to get to all these desired outcomes. Productivity growth on its own, for example, does not necessarily result in increased production of more nutritious foods, nor does it necessarily result in decreased negative environmental externalities from agricultural production. The objective of this Productivity Growth Coalition is to break down silos, to work across different groups to make sure that productivity growth is actually delivering across all of these different objectives. We have now over 60 members of this coalition. We'll be having our first meeting in November. We invite everyone to join us in helping to make this a reality. Thank you, Ajay. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice, for that honesty. And yes, you are right. The UN Food Systems Summit has changed the narrative world over to a systems approach. That's been a great victory for the summit. Earthring, to ensure that transition to regenerative food systems is just, equitable, and inclusive, does the food systems require more regulation, transparency, and accountability?
I am never one to call for more regulation, particularly as we sit at a global level to suggest what regulations are necessary. Those are decisions that we must encourage policymakers at local and regional level to explore, invest in, and then to design regulations based upon science and data. A suggestion of an agriculture system that is dominated by economic theory and regulatory suggestions that are designed at global policy making bodies does not provide the support that is necessary to ensure the diverse implementation of systems changes that are necessary to support the very particular needs of any farmers working in particular contexts. Let me take one step back very quickly to the question that you asked, Elise, about the climate commitment of the developed world for supporting adaptation. This is a must. The countries that are most vulnerable to the climate crisis are those that have very little to do with creating that crisis. But we must provide the financial resources from the donor countries to ensure the ability of countries, farmers, and communities to support the changes that are necessary as we talk about a food systems transition to make that transition real for those who are in the developing world.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those strong words. And even though if you don't agree on more regulation, I'm sure you will agree on better governance by policymakers.
Without a doubt.
Yes. So we come to Ben. The last question to you. How are corporates shifting their business models and bringing more transparency into the supply chains? And what are the challenges they are facing doing that? And especially from policymakers.
Yeah, thanks, Ajay. Appreciate that. Look, people would be aware, you're absolutely right, that more than ever, our customers and consumers are requiring more transparency through their supply chains. And many companies, and certainly at Cargill, are increasing the partnership, the visibility, the engagement across our supply chains, including the use of data and digital tools to be able to give that transparency through the supply chain as people are seeking to understand where their food comes from. We are also, as I mentioned before in my last questions, with the programs we put on the ground and the engagement and that linkage between what's happening at the farm level and what is happening at the consumer level or through the food chain, talking about how programs work, where they work, the practices that our farm customers are undertaking, where they're undertaking it, why they're undertaking it, and using data and digital tools to be able to explain that through the supply chain to give that transparency and visibility and understanding and confidence. It is in no one's interests, the growers or our consumer or a company like Cargill, it's in no one's interests to have a breakdown in the trust and credibility of our food system globally if we are to overcome not just the food challenges we have, AJ, but also to meet the challenge of the significant environmental challenges the globe has as well. And so we do need to be transparent about what we do know, and we do need to be transparent about what we're still learning as a global community, and really lean into this challenge together. And if we can do that in a transparent way and in partnerships by people understanding and realising that within our certain parts of the value chain and the supply chain, we all make a contribution, but no one can do it alone. We need those partnerships, and that does include, as you mentioned, the regulators and our governments as well.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. I think so. We are running out of time, and the panelists have given very clear answers. I mean, really complementing exactly how farmers articulated their points of view. I think it's time to hand over to Saswati. Saswati, I'm handing over the session. Are you?
Hello, I'm Sashwati Bora, Global Director of Regenerative Food Systems at the Nature Conservancy. At the outset, I would like to thank all the distinguished panelists, especially the farmer leaders, for an enriching discussion today. As was highlighted today, over the last century, farmers overcame enormous challenges to feed the world, and now they are being invited to be a central solution in restoring the planet. My special thanks to the two co-moderators, Dr. Kathleen Hayhoe and Ajay Virchakar, for skillfully guiding a very insightful discussion today. And I would also like to extend our deepest gratitude to the World Food Prize Foundation and Borlo Dialogues for supporting this event as part of their official agenda, and for Bharat Krishak Samaj for their partnership in this important dialogue. As was mentioned earlier today, we are releasing a flagship Foodscape Science report later today, so please do look out for a release. And the report will lay the groundwork for supporting a transition to a more regenerative food systems that not only nutritiously feeds a growing population, but also restores the planet. You heard from Dr. Deborah Bosio earlier today on some of the main findings from the report, but building on this science, the Nature Conservancy is now planning to work with partners to develop a portfolio of around 12 to 15 foodscapes, where we will focus our energy and our commitment to supporting a transformation agenda where these foodscapes can be a powerful catalyst for restoration and regeneration of nature, while improving livelihoods for producers who depend on these ecosystems. So as Maria Pilu said earlier today, we need to work together. And in these foodscapes, we really want to work with policymakers, local producers, civil society organizations, researchers, and the private sector to accelerate the transition. And as many of the panelists have also noted, to unlock scale by combining science, market innovation, financing, policy tools, and most importantly, the leadership of local producers and global coalitions to support change on the ground. We are already beginning to work on this in Northwest India and Argentinian Gran Chaco, and we would like to invite you to join us as we embark on this exciting journey. Please do get in touch with us if you would like to learn more. And with this, I would like to end this webinar by thanking you for joining us in the discussion today, and look forward to continuing our partnership to work towards food systems that work for the betterment of people and the planet. Thank you.